Living alone has its charms. There's a certain peace, a quiet rhythm that you fall into when it's just you and only you, day after day. My life was like that. Simple, predictable. Every morning, I'd wake up to the soft hum of the street below, brew my coffee and sit by the window, letting the stillness settle around me. I could go entire days without saying a word, without seeing a face I recognized. The apartment complex was a quiet one, almost silent, with only a handful of residents. It wasn't new, not by a long shot. There were cracks in the walls, and the pipes groaned like they carried a lifetime of secrets. But I liked it that way. There was something comforting about the silence, about the solitude. It felt like home. My own little corner of the world, away from the noise, from the crowds. Just me and the familiar walls that seemed to breathe around me. But then, everything changed. It was a Wednesday, around noon, when I noticed the moving truck. A bulky thing, old and battered, parked out front, with boxes stacked around it. I was curious, I'll admit it. I hadn't had a neighbor in months. The apartment next door had been empty for so long that I'd grown used to the silence, the way it sat heavy on that side of the wall. So, when I saw the boxes, I felt a strange thrill, an excitement I hadn't realized I was missing. A new neighbor. Perhaps this place would finally feel a little less empty. I watched from my window, trying to catch a glimpse. A figure moved in and out of view, carrying boxes, arranging things just out of sight. I couldn't see much, just shadows flickering through the glass. But there was something odd about it, even then. The way they moved, the precision, the calmness. There was no rush, no chaos, just this steady rhythm, almost like a dance, each movement slow and deliberate. When the truck finally drove off, I sat back feeling a strange sense of anticipation. It was silly, really, getting excited over a neighbor, but I hadn't had a reason to be curious about anyone in so long. This was new, a break from the routine. A part of me wanted to knock on their door, introduce myself, maybe even offer to help unpack. But I hesitated. There was something about the way they moved, that strange calmness, that made me feel like I should keep my distance. Still, the next day I found myself lingering by my door, listening. I could hear soft footsteps, the faint rustling of boxes. And then, just as I was about to walk away, I heard a voice. "Hello there." It startled me, caught me off guard. I hadn't expected them to speak, hadn't expected them to notice me at all. I turned, and there they were, standing in the doorway, watching me with the strangest smile I'd ever seen. It was wide, too wide, stretching across their face like it had been painted on. Their eyes held me, locking me in place, as if they could see straight through me. "Nice to finally meet you," they said, their voice smooth, almost rehearsed. I was beginning to think I'd be all alone here. I laughed, a nervous sound that barely escaped my throat. "Yeah, it's a pretty quiet place," I managed, feeling that smile burrow into me, twisting something inside. They didn't blink, didn't look away, just kept watching me, that grin never faltering, never fading. "So what do you do?" they asked, leaning forward slightly, their eyes sharp, hungry. "Do you have a lot of friends around here? Family?" The questions felt personal, too personal, but there was something in their gaze that made it impossible to pull away. I told them about my job, my quiet routine, the way I'd grown accustomed to solitude. Each word seemed to feed their smile, widening it, making it feel more unnatural. "That's wonderful," they said, their tone strange, like they were savoring each syllable. "It must be nice, being alone. Not many people understand that." There was a long pause, a silence that stretched out like a rubber band, pulling tight. And then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, they said, "Well, I'll see you around, neighbor." With that, they closed the door, leaving me standing there, my heart racing, my skin crawling. There was something off, something deeply unsettling about that smile, about the way it never changed, never softened, even when they spoke. It felt forced, like a mask, a disguise. But I brushed it off, told myself I was overthinking it. After all, they were just a neighbor. A little strange, maybe, but harmless, or so I thought. Days passed, and I tried to settle back into my routine, tried to shake off that strange feeling, that sense of unease that clung to me like a shadow. But every time I walked down the hallway, every time I passed their door, I felt their presence, felt that smile pressing against me, even through the walls. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was just being paranoid. But then, things started happening. It was subtle at first. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, just a flicker, a shadow passing by. I'd turn, expecting to see them, but the hallway would be empty, silent. I'd laugh at myself, shake my head and keep walking, trying to ignore the goosebumps prickling on my skin. But then, one night, as I was locking my door, I noticed something strange. Their door, it was open, just a crack, barely wide enough to see through. And there they were, standing behind it, watching me, that same smile plastered across their face. They didn't say a word, didn't move, just watched. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the lock. When I looked back, they were gone, the door shut as if they'd never been there. But it didn't stop. Every night it was the same. I'd walk down the hallway and their door would be slightly open, just enough for me to see their face, grinning, eyes unblinking, fixed on me. It felt like a game, a twisted, silent game. No matter how fast I walked, no matter how much I tried to ignore them, I could feel their eyes on me, feel that smile digging into my back. And then, it started happening in my apartment. At first, it was just a feeling, a sense that I wasn't alone. I'd be sitting in the living room, reading or watching TV, and I'd feel it, this prickling sensation, like someone was standing just behind me, watching. I'd turn, heart pounding, but there'd be nothing there, just empty space and silence. Then came the noises. Soft, barely there, but enough to make me listen. A faint shuffle, the creak of a floorboard, a whisper of laughter that seemed to drift through the walls. I'd tell myself it was nothing, that it was just the building settling, the pipes, the usual sounds of an old place. But deep down I knew they were watching me, even when I was alone. The worst part was the laughter. It was quiet, almost gentle, like someone trying to hold it back. It would start late at night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, a soft, stifled giggle that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I'd lie there, frozen, listening as it echoed through the apartment, fading in and out, like a ghostly melody, haunting me in the dark. And then one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I threw off the covers, grabbed my phone, and stormed into the hallway, heart racing, fingers trembling. I was done with the games, done with the whispers and the laughter. I needed to know what they wanted, needed to see that smile one more time, to prove to myself that it was real. I reached their door, raised my hand to knock, but stopped. The door was open, just a crack, as always. And there, in the darkness, I could see them, standing perfectly still, that same grin stretched across their face, eyes gleaming, almost glowing in the dim light. They didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me, that smile widening as if they knew, as if they'd been waiting. And then without a word, the door closed, leaving me alone in the silent hallway, my hand still raised, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echoing through the empty space. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it, but there was nothing to make sense of. They were there, and then they weren't. Just a grin in the dark, a shadow behind a door. I went back to my apartment, locked the door, and sat in the dark, trying to calm myself, trying to shake off the feeling that had taken root inside me, the feeling that I was being watched, even now. And that's when I heard it again. That soft, stifled laughter, drifting through the walls, through the silence, like wrapping around me like a noose, tightening, pulling me deeper into the dark. And I knew they weren't done with me. Not yet. There's a certain line you cross when curiosity becomes fear. I never saw it happen, never felt myself step over it, but one day I looked back and knew I was on the other side, trapped, with no way back. I started seeing them everywhere. It began slowly, like a dark spot in my vision, something I couldn't shake. No matter where I went, there they were. If I left my apartment and looked back, they'd be there, just outside their door, watching me with that same unchanging smile. If I walked down the hall, I'd catch a glimpse of them in the reflection of a window, staring, grinning. I thought maybe it was a trick of the mind, some lingering unease, a shadow that clung to me like the smell of smoke. But no, it was real. They were real. Every time I turned, every time I looked, that smile was there, wide and hollow, like it was painted onto their face. No matter where I went, that smile followed. One morning, I left to run errands, desperate for a break from the building, from that suffocating presence. I walked to the corner store, my mind racing, trying to distract myself, to feel normal again. And just as I was starting to relax, I saw them. There they were, standing by the shelves, staring at me. That same grin stretched across their face. No shopping bag, no items in their hands. Just watching. I turned away, grabbed what I needed, hoping that when I looked back, they'd be gone. But they weren't. When I walked to the checkout, there they were, standing by the door, waiting, smiling. My hands shook as I paid, my throat dry, my pulse racing. And as I stepped outside, they were there again, leaning against the wall, eyes fixed on me, that smile as constant as ever. I don't know how I made it back to my apartment, but when I finally closed the door behind me, I felt a weight lift, if only for a moment. But that relief was short-lived, because when I turned to lock the door, I saw it. A note. Just a small piece of paper slipped under my door with 3 words scrawled across it. I see you. The handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It looked like mine, my own letters, my own slant, like I had written it myself. But I hadn't. I was sure of that. My heart pounded as I picked it up, staring at those words, trying to make sense of it. But there was nothing to make sense of. Just 3 words taunting me, mocking me. And that wasn't the last one. The next day, another note appeared. And the day after that, each one a variation of the same thing. You can't hide from me. I'm watching. I know where you are. Every note was in my handwriting, every single one. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Maybe I was writing them myself, somehow in my sleep or in some kind of trance. I didn't know what to think anymore. I just knew I was afraid, terrified. I started checking my door constantly, peeking out through the peephole, making sure they weren't out there, watching. But it didn't matter. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were everywhere, that they could see me, no matter where I went, no matter what I did. I decided I'd had enough. I couldn't live like this. Couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers. I needed to know who they were, what they wanted. So one night, I waited by my door, listening, waiting for the right moment. When I heard their footsteps, I stepped into the hallway, ready to confront them. They were standing at the end of the hall, staring at me, as if they'd been waiting for this too. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and walked toward them, my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to meet their eyes, to find some trace of humanity, some flicker of emotion, but all I saw was that smile, that horrible, unchanging smile. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. "Why are you watching me?" They didn't respond, didn't even blink. They just smiled. And in that moment I realized something that made my blood run cold. I couldn't see their reflection. There was a mirror on the wall behind them, and I could see myself, the hallway, everything, but not them. It was like they didn't exist, like they were some kind of ghost, a shadow, something that couldn't be captured in glass. I felt my legs go weak, my body trembling as I stumbled back, my mind racing, struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. I turned, my hands shaking, desperate to get away, but even as I moved, I could feel their eyes on me, feel that smile burning into my back. I made it back to my apartment, slammed the door, locked it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And then I heard it. That laughter, soft and muffled, drifting through the walls, wrapping around me, filling the room. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself it was just the building, just the pipes. But I knew better. I knew it was them. I couldn't escape them. No matter where I went, no matter what I did, they were always there, always watching, always smiling. I decided to tell the landlord. I had to. I couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I went to their office, sat down, tried to explain what was happening. I told them about the notes, the strange behavior, the fact that I couldn't see them in mirrors. I could see the landlord's expression change, their eyes narrowing, their lips pressing into a thin line. When I finished, they just looked at me, their face blank, unreadable. "There's no one living in that apartment," they said, their voice flat, emotionless. "It's been vacant for months." I felt my stomach drop, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. I tried to protest, tried to explain that I'd seen them, that they were there, that I wasn't making this up. But the landlord just shook their head, told me I was mistaken, that maybe I'd been working too hard, that I needed rest. I left the office, feeling numb, feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I imagined it all? Was it possible that I'd been seeing things, that I'd somehow invented this entire nightmare? I didn't know what to believe anymore. I decided to call a friend, someone who could see for themselves, someone who could confirm that I wasn't going crazy. I invited them over, told them about the strange behavior, about the notes, about everything. They listened, their face a mix of concern and confusion, but they agreed to come, to help. When they arrived, I felt a surge of relief, like maybe this would finally end, like maybe I'd finally get some answers. I took them down the hallway, showed them the apartment, pointed to the door. But when they looked, there was nothing there. Just an empty space, a silent hallway, and a closed door. They turned to me, their face full of pity, their eyes sad, like they were looking at someone who'd lost their mind. I tried to explain, tried to make them understand, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain something like this? How could I make them see what I'd seen? I felt the walls closing in around me, felt that smile pressing into my mind, felt that laughter echoing in my ears. My friend left, shaking their head, and I was alone again. Alone. Except for them. Because even now, even as I sit here, I can feel them watching me, feel that smile digging into me, like a knife twisting, cutting deeper and deeper. I don't know how much longer I can take it. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Because every time I look, every time I turn, they're there. And that smile, it never changes, it never fades. It's always there, waiting, watching. And I know deep down that they're never going to leave. That smile is going to haunt me, follow me, no matter where I go, no matter what I do. Because they're always there, always watching. Even when I close my eyes, there are certain lines you can't uncross. Certain things that, once you see them, change everything. I'd reached that point, past fear, past reason, into a place where nothing felt real anymore. They were everywhere, always there, always watching, that smile growing wider, darker, like it had taken root in my mind, in my skin. I was desperate, willing to do anything to end it. I spent entire nights sitting by my door, waiting for the first sound of movement, the faintest hint of that laughter. But they were clever, patient. They wanted me to come to them, to seek them out, to let them in. One night, after hours of lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I felt something snap inside me. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, needed to see them, needed to know who they were, or what they were. I left my apartment, my hand shaking as I reached for the door. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I knew I wouldn't stop until I'd looked into their eyes one last time. The hallway was silent, empty, the air thick with a strange, heavy stillness that felt like it was waiting for me, watching. Their door was open, just a crack as always. I could see the faint glow of a single light inside, casting shadows that danced along the floor. I stepped closer, my heart pounding, my mouth dry, feeling that familiar sense of dread crawling up my spine. But I couldn't stop. I had to know. I pushed the door open, stepping into the darkness, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. The air inside was cold, colder than it should have been, with a damp, earthy smell that clung to my skin, to my clothes. I couldn't see much, just the vague outlines of furniture, the faint glint of something metallic in the corner. And then I saw them. They were standing in the middle of the room, facing away from me, perfectly still, their backs straight, their heads slightly tilted to one side, like they were listening, waiting. I felt a chill crawl through me, my body frozen, my mind racing, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. I was trapped, caught in the pull of that silence, of that stillness. Slowly they turned, their movements slow, deliberate, each step echoing in the silence. And then, I saw it. Their face. The smile was there, wider than ever, stretched across their face like it didn't belong, like it was something they'd taken, something they wore. Their eyes were dark, empty, with a depth that felt wrong, like staring into a void, into a place that shouldn't exist. And then they spoke. "You came to find me." Their voice was soft, almost amused, as if they'd been waiting for this for me. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I could feel their eyes on me, feel that smile wrapping around me, sinking into my skin, into my bones. "You wanted to know who I am," they continued, taking a step closer. "But you already know. You've always known." I felt a shiver run through me, a cold, creeping fear that sank into my soul, a realization that I couldn't shake, couldn't ignore. Because somehow, deep down, I did know. I'd known from the moment I'd first seen them, from the first time I'd heard that laughter. They were part of me, a shadow, a mirror, something that had been waiting, hiding, for as long as I could remember. I took a step back, my heart pounding, my breath catching in my throat. But they just stood there, watching, smiling, their eyes never leaving mine. "You can't hide from yourself," they whispered, their voice barely a breath, barely a sound. "No matter how far you run, no matter how deep you bury it, it always finds you." I felt a surge of panic, a desperate need to escape, to run, to leave this place, this darkness, this thing that I couldn't face. But even as I turned, even as I stumbled back toward the door, I knew it was too late. They were everywhere, in every shadow, in every corner, in every reflection. I could feel them, feel that smile pressing into me, filling me, consuming me. I ran out of the apartment, my feet pounding against the floor, my breath coming in short, desperate gasps. I didn't look back, didn't dare to see if they were following. I just kept running, down the stairs, through the empty hallways, out into the cold night air. But even then I could feel it. That smile, that presence, lingering in the shadows, watching. I stumbled down the street, barely aware of where I was going, my mind racing, my heart pounding, feeling like I was losing myself, like I was slipping into a place I couldn't come back from. I needed help, needed someone to tell me that I wasn't alone, that I wasn't losing my mind. I thought of my friend, the one who'd come before, who hadn't seen anything, hadn't understood. But maybe this time, maybe they'd believe me. I found myself at their door, banging, my fists trembling, my voice a desperate whisper as I called their name, over and over. They answered, their face full of confusion, of concern, as they took in the sight of me, disheveled, panicked, my eyes wild. "You have to help me," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. "They're real, they're everywhere. I can't escape them." They led me inside, sat me down, tried to calm me, but I couldn't focus, couldn't stop shaking. I told them everything, every detail, every note, every time I'd seen that smile, that face. I begged them to believe me, to help me, to see what I'd seen. They looked at me with pity, with sadness, their eyes soft, full of something I didn't want to see, something that felt too close to the truth. They didn't believe me. No one did. And that's when I realized I was alone, truly, completely alone. I left, feeling hollow, empty, like a shell of who I'd been. I walked back to my apartment, my footsteps echoing in the silence, the weight of that smile pressing down on me, heavier with each step. I could feel them, waiting, watching, just out of sight, just beyond the edge of my vision. When I reached my door, I saw it. A final note, pinned to the wood, written in my handwriting, just like the others. But this one was different. Just one word, scrawled across the paper, each letter sharp, deliberate. "Welcome." I felt my hands tremble as I took the note, staring at that single word, that single simple message. And in that moment I knew what they wanted, what they'd been waiting for. They were inviting me in, inviting me to join them, to become like them. I opened the door, stepped inside, feeling the darkness close around me, feeling that smile press into me, sinking deeper, pulling me down into a place I couldn't escape. I looked into the mirror, saw my own face staring back at me, saw that smile, my smile, widening, twisting, taking on a life of its own. I could feel it now, inside me, a part of me, something that had always been there, waiting, hidden. I was them, and they were me, two sides of the same shadow, the same darkness. And as I stood there watching myself, watching that smile, I felt a strange, terrible calm settle over me, a sense of acceptance. Because I knew that I was never alone, that I'd never been alone. They were with me always, watching, smiling, and I knew I would never be alone again.